You're watching ABC News 24. Hello, I'm Kim Landers. The Electoral Commission has launched an urgent investigation into the disappearance of more than 1,300 ballots during the recount of the West Australian Senate vote. Commissioner Ed Killerstein has apologised for the error and says exhaustive efforts have been made to find the missing ballot papers. The former Federal Police Commissioner Mick Kelty is to head the investigation. The AEC says it will closely examine the WA Senate result and determine whether a petition to the Court of Disputed Returns is necessary. The Australian Electoral Commission's Phil Dyack says it is disappointing, but the AEC will go ahead and declare a result in the WA Senate race.
The ANC has enjoyed a very good reputation over the years. Yes, this is a disappointment. It's something we would rather not have happened, but it is something that in this very good institution that we wish to learn from very quickly, and we wish to also continue to serve, the electors in the best fashion as we can. The Electoral Commissioner has apologised to the electors in Western Australia in our statement today, so we'll be getting on with the job now to see the next steps in the process to distribute preferences, declare the result and return the writ.
In the meantime, the Australian Electoral Commission has announced that Clive Palmer has won the recount for the Queensland seat of Fairfax by just 53 votes. The head of the Palmer United Party was locked in a tight contest with the LNP for the seat. Well, parts of Queensland Police headquarters in Brisbane have been evacuated after a suspicious device was found in a secure car park. The bomb squad is currently inspecting the pipe-like object. The adjacent streets have been closed off as a precaution. Australia's live export trade is once again the focus of uncomfortable scrutiny. New footage shows sheep being sold individually in Jordan, then slaughtered in the street and in one case in a private home. The video was shot earlier this month by activists from Animals Australia and provided to the ABC. A new system was put in place in 2011 after the furore over the treatment of Australian cattle in Indonesian abattoirs. Transport investigators in New Zealand say pilot error caused a fatal balloon crash in January last year. All 11 people on board died when the balloon hit power lines, burst into flames and crashed to the ground on New Zealand's North Island. Investigators say 53-year-old commercial pilot Lance Hopping was a cannabis user and that it is highly likely he smoked marijuana shortly before the ill-fated flight.
The possibility that the pilot's performance was impaired as a result of ingesting cannabis cannot be excluded.
The Transport Accident Commission has called for urgent law changes to prevent substance abuse across aviation, maritime and rail transport. And now Julie Doyle joins us with Capitol Hill, live from Canberra.
Thanks, Kim. Voters in WA could be heading back to the polls after the Electoral Commission confirmed almost 1,400 votes had been lost. This is Capitol Hill. Welcome to the program. I'm Julie Doyle. The recount of Senate votes in Western Australia has taken an unexpected turn. The Australian Electoral Commission has lost almost 1,400 votes. The Commission has apologised to voters and candidates and appointed former Federal Police boss Mick Kelty to investigate just how this happened. One of the Electoral Commission's critics, Clive Palmer, has called this another example of incompetent and fraudulent behaviour. Green Senator Scott Ludlam lost out in the original ballot and pushed for this recount. He doesn't agree entirely with Mr Palmer's assessment, but they both want the AEC to wait before declaring a result.
There's clearly an element of human error involved. You're counting 1.3 million pieces of paper with a large workforce. But I think what's happened in this case needs to be rectified before the result's declared, and on that I do agree with you.
So you don't think fraud's involved?
I don't think
fraud's involved?
Look, it's obviously too early to say, but on that I will say if Mr Kelty unearths any evidence at all of wrongdoing, the police should be immediately called in.
Voters, candidates and the Electoral Commission itself now have the option of appealing to the Court of Disputed Returns, which can order a fresh election. A short time ago, I spoke to the Electoral Commission's Phil Dyack and asked him how this could happen.
Well, we're nearing the end of the recount in Western Australia, nearing the end of the recount of 1.3 million votes. And in the process of elimination, in going through all of those votes, We've identified, as we've announced today, 1,375 votes, of which 1,255 were formal above-the-line votes. The rest were informals, are misplaced. And so at the moment, unfortunately, they have been misplaced and are unlikely to be located at this stage before we distribute the preferences and complete the declaration of the poll for the recount in Western Australia.
Well, just on that then, how can you move ahead in this process and move to the declaration of a poll when you still have this large number of votes that are missing?
Well, the Commonwealth Electoral Act's processes are quite clear in that you conduct the recount and you do, once you've data entered that information, because that's the way that the process works with the Senate, to have all the votes together to determine the quota and the distribution of preferences that determines the senators-elect. We will be going through all of those processes. We will be declaring the senators at the poll. We will be returning the writ. We have advised that these votes are misplaced. The Electoral Commissioner has launched an investigation of that today. A former distinguished public servant, former Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police, Mick Kilty, will independently examine all the circumstances and facts around those misplaced votes. He'll look at whether there are any process or procedural issues or failures, provide findings and recommendations to the Electoral Commission.
Just on the fact that you keep referring to those votes as having been misplaced, what's happened there? Where in the process have they been lost?
Well, we've looked methodically through all the premises where those votes were stored and where they have moved. We do know things about those votes. As I mentioned before, we know which were above the line formal, which were informal. We know that most of those votes were from the electoral division of Pearce and Western Australia, a lesser number from Forrest. We're able to do that through a process of elimination and the documentation that we have as we, bundle votes and provide information that enables us to work systematically through the original count and to the recount. But the misplacement is something we've identified through all that.
So if you know basically where they've come from, can you narrow it down to who had responsibility for these votes then?
That'll be something that obviously the examination presumably would look at. From our perspective, we've looked exhaustively and comprehensively in Western Australia at all the premises, tracked where the votes have been transported and so forth. And it's not until today, with all the last parcels of votes to be recounted open, that process of elimination has led us to the conclusion that they are misplaced.
Is there any hope of finding them, or have you basically given up?
Well, from here, obviously, we do consider them misplaced. We have tried all avenues through, thinking through this issue. As I say, the movement of the ballots, looking exhaustively, a range of contingencies. From here, we will complete the recount, do the data entry we need to do into our computer systems, because remember, there's below-the-line votes that weren't subject to the recount, that, if you like, are waiting to be put together with all the recounted votes before we run the distribution of preferences, something which the Australian Electoral Office of Western Australia will announce quite soon, and then lead to the declaration of the poll and the return of the writ to the State Governor of Western Australia.
Now, this was a very tight election, the WA Senate, and at one point in the count it came down to a very small number of votes at a critical point of the count. So we're talking about almost 1,400 votes now. So how likely is it that these misplaced votes would have affected the outcome?
In essence, you're asking something that is putting, I suppose, two different things together in two time periods. Yes, there was a very close vote in a particular exclusion that was pivotal and something of a basis to the recount appeal, which the Electoral Commissioner agreed to, and we've conducted it. Now, to compare, the number of votes in that exclusion 14 to the number of missing votes, It's not a like-for-like comparison, if you like, but it's the distribution of preferences this time, and it is a transparent distribution in that a full report of all of the counts of what the vote differences were in determining senators-elect, whether they were elected outright because they have a quota outright, or relied on preferences. All of that will be provided in the distribution of preferences and published as routine when we conduct these things.
Well, joining me to discuss the day is Labor MP Ed Husic in Sydney, and in Brisbane, the LNP's Jane Prentice. Good afternoon to you both. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Julie. Hi, Ed.
G'day.
Now, let's get started firstly on what we were just talking about there, the schmozzle, I guess, what we're seeing in WA with the Senate recount. Ed, do you think they should hold off on declaring the poll?
I absolutely think they do need to hold off declaring the poll because there are a lot of questions that remain unanswered. Clearly there's a high degree of human error here and things need to be addressed. My big concern is what impact this has on the confidence of the voting public in the way that the system's managed, and until some pretty key questions get answered, for example how the error could occur that a sizable number of votes go missing, then I think they should hold off.
Jane, what about you? Do you think this does damage the faith and the confidence that the voters have in the Australian Electoral Commission?
Well, it is very disappointing what's happened, and I hope the Kelty inquiry can sort of be acted on very quickly. I think it's a great concern to everyone.
Ed, do you think in WA the Labor Senator Louise Pratt is one of the candidates whose future could be determined by this? Do you think she should be worried about the prospect of a fresh election?
I think everyone would be focused on getting the result right, making sure that all the, as I indicated earlier, unanswered questions get dealt with, and obviously we want to see someone of Louise's calibre return to the Senate because she plays an important role within our caucus.
I guess to you both, Jane, you firstly, are you shocked by the way this has transpired, the fact that such a large number of ballot papers in a crucial, very tight recount could be lost like this? Jane?
It is definitely quite a shock, I have to say. I'm quite surprised that it did happen. I have to say I've been in politics a long time and I don't remember something like this happening before, so it is very disappointing, and as I said, I hope the Kelty inquiry can resolve the issue very quickly.
And just while we're still on electoral matters, Jane, we've had the result declared now for Fairfax, and Clive Palmer has won that seat by 53 votes. Are you looking forward to having him in Parliament?
Well, it'll be a lively affair having Clive in Parliament with us. I've known Clive for many years, and he's quite an entertaining character, and I'm sure he will make his mark on federal Parliament, so it'll be delighted to welcome him down there. I congratulate him on this result, and I think the next Parliament will be very interesting with his contribution.
Ed Husic, what kind of contribution do you think he'll make?
Well, I think everyone's waiting to see what he does, but having survived a hung parliament of the 2010-13 era, when people say things will be interesting, we've had interesting.
Well, might make it a bit lively though, for sure. Now, turning now to the National Broadband Network, and the NBN Co has updated its rollout maps, removing hundreds of thousands of homes that were scheduled to be connected to the fibre optic cable. The Communications Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, says the old maps were misleading because they listed areas as being under construction, even though they were only at the planning stage. The Prime Minister says the new NBN rollout map is more honest.
We haven't broken our word. It was always misleading of the NBN to claim that the rollout was taking place when all that had actually happened was that planning had begun for a rollout to take place sometime in the far distant future. The whole NBN was based on misleading assertions and promises that were constantly being made and constantly being broken. The NBN under Labor was way over budget. It was way behind schedule. For the first time in its existence, there is now honesty about the NBN.
That's the Prime Minister Tony Abbott there. While to talk about this, the opposition's communications spokesman Jason Clare joined me from Sydney a short time ago.
Well, the real problem here is it's a broken promise. Malcolm Turnbull said that all contracts would be honoured, but he's now breaking that promise. There's 500,000 homes and businesses where contracts have been issued and work has commenced that have now been taken off a website this week, and they're now in limbo. They're thinking, hang on a second, I was told that we were going to get fibre to the home. All contracts we thought were going to be honoured, and now it seems like these contracts are not going to be honoured, and these 500,000 homes and businesses are not going to get fibre to their home.
Well, the government's saying simply what they're doing is they've got the two categories now where they have service available and build commenced, and that the old maps just weren't telling the full story.
I don't mind how they categorise these things, but the fact is a contract's been issued, work has begun. People are entitled to believe that if the opposition, when in opposition, said that if we form a government we will honour the contracts and we'll deliver fibre to your home or to your business, you're entitled to believe that that promise will be honoured. Now these people are in limbo. 500,000 places right across the country, from Sydney to Perth to Darwin to Adelaide, Tasmania and Victoria, where people who thought they were going to get the NBN, the real NBN, not fraudband, they thought they were going to get fibre all the way to their home or business, now look like they're going to miss out because of a broken promise.
But is it correct, though, that under the old maps of the rollout that it said under construction, where it was an area where really only planning had started rather than actual construction?
Well, where work has begun, where either design work, network design work or rod and roping work has begun. But the key point here is a contract's been issued and people... So not real construction, though. It just, even if it was just planning, it was still classified as under construction. But Julie, does it mean that those people aren't entitled to believe that they're going to get fibre to their home or fibre to their business when the former opposition, now the government, said we'd honour that contract, and now they're saying we're not going to honour that contract?
Was it a little misleading, though, to put it in that way, to categorise it in those terms? Was that misleading?
And I don't mind how things are categorised. Malcolm Turnbull has said that he wants more transparency. Terrific. More the better. The key point here is if you make a commitment to honour all existing contracts, then honour them. They're going down the path of fibre to the node. We don't think that's the right approach. But for people that have had contracts and are entitled to believe that they're getting fibre to the home because work has begun, then to go back now and rip them off a website and say we're not going to give you fibre to the home, that's a broken promise in my book.
Has this been a problem, though, with the way that this project was handled, that expectations were raised, that we have seen timetables haven't been met, the number of homes haven't been met? Wouldn't it have been better to be a bit more cautious when putting out these maps and that showed such large areas being covered?
Well, construction is behind and it needs to be improved. It has been over the last few months. And if you look at the report that was issued yesterday, it shows that 20,000 premises were passed by fibre in July, 20,000 in August and 20,000 in September. And then you see this massive dip and only 2,000 places were passed by fibre in existing areas in October. What we've seen over the course of the last month since the election is construction has stalled. The strategic review that the Minister has announced has in effect created review paralysis, and construction companies who've been doing this work are now being told that there's no work forthcoming, and construction companies right across the country are telling me, they're telling the Minister, they're telling other people in government that they're going to hit the wall unless they're given more work, and they're going to have to start putting people off.
But what I was asking though about the way that the previous rollout was framed and spoken about and the way the maps were done, did that raise expectations though that were just unrealistic? Would it have been better to have been more cautious?
I think that it's legitimate for people when work begins, when the network design work begins, when the rod and roping out on the street begins, it's legitimate for all of those people to assume that you're going to get fibre all the way to your home, that you're going to get first-class, fast-speed broadband, and especially when you've got the Minister saying that you'll honour existing contracts. Now, it's up to Malcolm Turnbull to make it clear. 500,000 people out there, 500,000 homes and businesses out there that are in limbo, who've been taken off the website, who now fear they're not going to get fibre all the way to the premises. It's up to the Minister to make it clear whether they are going to receive fibre all the way to the premises or whether they'll be the first 500,000 victims of the Coalition's cuts to the NBN.
Jason Clare, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ed Husic, to you now on this one. Do you think the NBN Co, the former management, was too optimistic in the way it presented the maps of the rollout areas and the timetable for the rollout?
No, I completely reject this argument that's been put forward by Malcolm Turnbull today that their maps are reflecting reality. When Malcolm Turnbull says that those maps have been designed or redrawn to reflect reality, that is simply a bald-faced lie. The lie is founded upon his claim or his lie before the election that he would honour construction contracts, and within a few breaths of becoming Australia's Communications Minister, he adjusted that commitment from honouring construction contracts to honouring construction contracts where the build instruction had been issued. This sleight of hand saw tens of thousands of homes across Western Sydney affected as a result of what he said, because unless they were actually having boots on the ground, having the rollout occur, those were the only homes that would be seeing the rollout. So that's about 300,000.
Well, they're saying there's a difference between planning on paper, for example, and actually being under construction.
That level of semantics by the Coalition government will be cold comfort to those people that were expecting that the rollout would hit their premises. The process in very simple terms is you go out to check the actual ducts to see their state, you then design on the basis of seeing that, and then you roll out. It is a three-stage process in broad terms, and the Coalition has, through its semantics, robbed people of the NBN. They keep saying that they're friends of better broadband, but in my area there'll be about 9,000 homes, including some places, Julie, that Malcolm Turnbull agreed, for example Woodcroft, were areas of need, and he even said that it would be a travesty of social justice for them not to get the NBN, and he has now effectively robbed those people of the NBN.
Jane Prentice, I want to get your response to this. Will it be disappointing for people who looked at those old maps and thought they were getting the NBN in a faster timetable, and now their suburbs aren't included anymore?
Well, Julie, let's just go back a step. I mean, the Rudd-Gillard government promised that this whole project would be finished by June 13 and that it would only cost $4.6 billion. We now have possibly the world's slowest and most expensive fibre rollout anywhere to be seen. And what's happened is that it's been totally unrealistic. Ed himself used to criticise the government's delivery of this project. So what we're seeing now is the need of rolling it out faster, and what we've been very disappointed to find is that where areas have been told that they are, quote, under construction, about to commence, that indeed the NBN project actually had it not happening for another 2 years. Now, I represent an inner city seat in Brisbane, Ryan. Now, we weren't even on the map for the next 3 years. So our residents weren't going to see anything for another 5 years, and that would have been pushed out even further.
But is it just semantics, though, to make this argument about the difference between planning and being under construction?
Well, the Coalition is now rolling it out and we're getting on with construction. It's not semantics to say that under construction, most people understand that to mean that construction has commenced, that there is actual physical activity happening. And in this case, we found that it was sort of a 2-year difference between the Labor's idea of construction and what was actually happening on the ground. And this is what we've seen for the last 6 years, is push out on timeframes. And the latest one was Labor went to the last election saying that 1 million homes would be delivered by June next year. And in fact, already NBN Co have said, oh, well, actually, it's only 500,000, literally 50% of what they said only a few months ago.
Ed,
so they have never been able to deliver.
Has this been a problem, Ed, though, that they have failed throughout this process to meet their expectations, and that things have taken longer and the number of homes has been smaller all the way through this project, not just with this revision of these maps?
Well, you'll recall that for legitimate safety concerns, we had to stop the rollout earlier this year because of concerns about the presence of asbestos in ducts, and we weren't going to jeopardise people's lives while that issue had to be dealt with. The fact of the matter is that once we dealt with that, we were able to restart the construction process. But for Jane to suggest that the Coalition is now rolling out its degraded form of the NBN is just wrong, because everything has pretty much been suspended while this whole process of review is being undertaken by Malcolm Turnbull, who said that he had a plan and now has basically shoveled off action to a review. And in the meantime, as I said, 9,000 homes in our part of Western Sydney will be robbed of the NBN and will be shoved back into the broadband dark ages.
Okay, Ed, I do want to move on to another issue before we run out of time, and that's the issue of live exports, and it's reared its head again today. The ABC's Lateland program has aired footage of sheep being mistreated in Jordan. It's prompted renewed calls for a ban on live exports, but the government says it's determined not to overreact, as it accused Labor of doing in the past.
Oh, look, I feel sick in the stomach. I feel sick in the stomach thinking of the cruelty being meted out to those Australian animals. And I feel sick in the stomach that we've had a succession of governments now that just don't seem to care about it.
This process is currently being investigated by my department. We are already looking at how these sheep got leaked from outside the SCAS system. We have to ask ourselves this question. No matter what we do, there are always going to be breaches in some form or another like this.
Jane, we have a new system now for exports, live exports, the supply chain assurance system. But if people aren't abiding by the rules, if it can't be enforced, is it just failing?
No, I think the Minister, Barnaby Joyce, had the appropriate analogy this morning when he said, you will always get someone breaking the law. You know, just as you have roads with speed limits, people break the law. They need to be fined and penalised for doing that, but it's not an excuse to shut down the road. And that is a problem we have. There will always be some rogue element. I don't know anyone in Australia, both sides of Parliament, who are not appalled at the mistreatment of animals, but it's not a reason to shut down.
But how much of a rogue element is it, Jane, in that we hear about these incidents when a vision gets provided to the media? How do we know that this isn't happening all the time and we're just getting finding out about it through these footage that's being taken?
Well, we do know, we do have inspectors, we do have officers in place, and we have an industry that's determined to make sure that we don't have these rogue elements because we can't afford to shut down this industry. It's a critical one for Australia's economy, and it's still going to happen. Quite frankly, it's better for Australia to be involved and shut down these practices than just to step away and let everyone do what they like. I believe we are having a positive impact on the industry generally.
Ed Husic, do you think it's time to look at other options apart from live exports, or do you agree that this industry plays an important role in helping families and producers in this country?
It is time that we transition away from live exports, and I've come to that conclusion after being someone who, when approached by constituents who wanted to see this happen, was reluctant to reach that position. But I saw repeated instances. These aren't rogue elements. I mean, we had, since the Four Corners expose back in 2011, we've had up to 10 different cases in different parts of the world where animals had been mistreated. I'd hoped that the variety of measures that had been taken and put into effect would have effect, but they haven't. And to see the footage last night on Lateland reaffirms in my mind that regardless of what the sector says, they cannot guarantee animal welfare. We will keep seeing these repeated instances, and even though people say they're appalled by it, nothing is being done to transition away.
And we'll have to leave it there, Ed. We're about to run out of time. Ed Husic and Jane Prentice, thank you both for joining me today. And that's Capitol Hill for now. We'll be back at the same time again tomorrow.
A daughter's search for the father she never knew.
I would write every week to my father to say, when can I see you again?
Unearths a myriad of secrets and lies.
It was a sense of mystery, really. Who were these people?
Made all the more startling by the famous woman behind them. Australian Story.
Tomorrow on News Exchange, finding that perfect match online. Internet users are getting more comfortable with digital dating and more of them are finding their ideal partner in cyberspace. What are your thoughts on dating sites and apps? Are attitudes changing? Have you ever tried them? And can you ultimately find long-term love online? Let us know on Twitter. Just use the NX hashtag or search for ABC News 24 on Facebook.
Join Matt Cargill for News Exchange tomorrow on ABC News 24.
Reporting from Washington, ABC News, London. New Delhi, reporting from Darwin.
For ABC News 24.
Hello, I'm James McHale and thanks for joining me for this national edition of ABC News. Today, Clive Palmer confirmed in his lower house seat while the Senate recount ends in chaos. The WA Senate recount comes up 1,300 votes short, putting any result in further doubt. The same-sex marriage debate continues, this time in the New South Wales Parliament. Clean-up crews in the ruins of Fukushima tested by a huge tank of radioactive water suspended high above the ground. And a small child steals the limelight during a Family Day Mass at the Vatican. The repercussions from the September election are reverberating loudly today. Clive Palmer has just been declared the winner of the recount of the Queensland seat of Fairfax. But there are bigger developments in the West, where more than 1,000 votes have gone missing in the Senate recount in Western Australia, and it could end in a fresh election being called there. Political correspondent Greg Jennett reports.
What was an electoral thriller just became an electoral mystery. The tightest of tight vote counts led to an extraordinary recount of Western Australia's 1.3 million Senate ballots. Now, 1,300 have gone missing.
We've looked exhaustively and comprehensively in Western Australia at all the premises, tracked where the votes have been transported and so forth. That process of elimination has led us to the conclusion that they are misplaced.
Former Federal Police Chief Mick Kelty has been called in to run an investigation. Totally unsatisfactory is the Special Minister of State's description of the affair, and he's said as much to the Electoral Commissioner.
We're very disappointed that these votes have gone missing. We are very determined to get to the bottom of what is the cause, what are the learnings from the misplaced votes.
The fate of several Senate candidates hinges on what happens next. The Palmer United Party's Dio Wang and the Greens' Scott Ludlam are among them.
If Mr Kilty unearths any evidence at all of wrongdoing, the police should be immediately called in.
The AEC is due to close the recount and declare the result soon. But if that's done without the 1,300 missing ballots, an appeal to the High Court is highly likely. Clive Palmer's already demanding one. The court could order a fresh election for the Senate in Western Australia, a trip back to the ballot for 1.3 million voters, and prolonged uncertainty over the shape of the new Senate would follow.
Australia's live export trade is once again the focus of uncomfortable scrutiny. New footage shows sheep being sold individually in Jordan, then slaughtered in the street, and in one case in a private home. The video was shot earlier this month by activists from Animals Australia and provided to the ABC. The sheep had been sent to Jordan for the Muslim festival of Eid, and the way in which they were slaughtered does not fall under the live export rules. That new system was put in place in 2011 after the furore over the treatment of Australian cattle in Indonesian abattoirs.
I want to make sure that in this instance we don't overreact like we did last time, because the last decision, everybody acknowledges now, was one of the worst decisions Australia made on so many levels. You have to work with your neighbour, not stand on your pulpit and lecture to your neighbour, and if you work quietly and in a considerate way, you get to an outcome that you want.
Certainly what we're dealing with is clear and extensive evidence of a breach of Australian regulations that resulted in mass animal cruelty to animals that should have been protected. That is what this issue is about today, and I'm sure the community will be expecting, and even the industry is demanding, strong sanctions as a result of this.
Prime Minister Tony Abbott says the government won't respond in haste. He says it would be foolish to make policy on the run and the basis of a few media reports. Independent MP Andrew Wilkie has also weighed into the debate, accusing the government of not caring about animal welfare.
We want to do the right thing by the countries of the world, and many of them are well served by a live export industry. And we're not going to play games with our customers. We're not going to play games with the food security of other countries. That said, it's important that the industry proceed on a sound footing. We believe that appropriate precautions have already been put in place. This footage certainly is being investigated, and if the rules are being broken, well, we'll ensure that that ends and that the rules are enforced.
That's government code for we're going to wait and see and just hope that, the community